how many people here have never used a camera with film in it? Just put your hand up. If you've never used a... So some of you may not realize this, but let's just actually think about how the world has changed. We used to have these cameras, and cameras had film. There were typically 24 or 36 shots on the film. Now let's imagine that there's a group of us that are going to sit down. Let's say 10 of us are going to sit down, and we're going to have dinner, and we're all going to smile, say cheese, and then have our picture taken. Let's look at what the world used to look like, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Somebody would have a camera, go click. They couldn't see if anybody had their eyes closed. So we don't know if the picture works. We then, once we finished off taking the 24 pictures on the thing, we'd have to go to a chemist or somewhere to get the film processed. That would take a couple of days, it could be a week. When you get back, you suddenly see that on half of them, the people got their eyes closed, and you basically lost the whole thing. Well, you can't go back in time to recreate it. And even if you do have that perfect picture, and you want to share it with those 10 people you had dinner with, you have to go back again, get 10 prints, then get their physical mail address to then send them out with something called an envelope and a stamp. If we look then at how many people then have been taking pictures right now, we have live streaming to the internet at the moment. What is clear is that we've actually gone through a huge and dramatic change in technology, that these things, we're only just beginning to see how profound they are. So with that, we have Frank on stage, and we're going to carry on the conversation on Bitcoin just to show how revolutionary some of these things are. Let's welcome Frank. Many thanks.
I love the music. So following up on Nick, who here actually has a Bitcoin wallet? Raise your hand. So Nick, there are quite a few people in the audience, so that's a good sign. So maybe I'm not going too much into depth here today because we need to scale Bitcoin. It's a big debate within the Bitcoin community of how we can get from here to beyond. So let's start with where we've come within a short period of time from when it started in 2009 with the Genesis block to today. The total cryptocurrency market, which started with Bitcoin, now is over $8 billion. And while some of you in the audience probably has heard about blockchain technology and the banks are using that to improve their efficiency within their existing systems, make no mistake, the largest production blockchain in the world is Bitcoin, and it currently has over 82% of all the cryptocurrencies, right? So it's by far the largest. Then if you have to put that in the S&P, it sits somewhere between this medical company, Varian, and Kohl's, which is a large department store, just for comparison where we are. Now let's look at the security. So Bitcoin is secured by computers all over the world that solve a mathematical puzzle in order to get rewarded Bitcoins as well as validate the transaction, for which they get a very small, tiny mining fee. So it's not entirely free, but it's as close to free as it can possibly be. Now, the current security of this network is over 1.4 billion gigahashes. That sounds like an enormous number, and it is an enormous number, and it's growing at an exponential rate. To put that in perspective, I like to use the example of a company called KNC Miner, which is a company based out of Stockholm, Sweden, where we are based. And they've raised over $31 million as a company. And with that, they built an entire data center in the northern part of Sweden to do nothing but solve these blocks. And they do it with computers that they specifically designed to do so. And they reach a nano-level meter of 60 nanometers, which is in line with what Intel is producing. And all of these computers in this giant data center, and I know they're building another one, only accounts for 4% of the entire network of the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can imagine how large this network is. It exceeds the supercomputers combined in the world. It exceeds Google. It exceeds any other computer network, with the exception maybe of the internet. So how successful is Bitcoin? This is actually the data from Nick's company. So Nick's company is the largest Bitcoin company in the world. They have almost 7 million users on their platform, and a total of 10 million users are existing in the world today. So it's growing at a phenomenal rate. But there is a problem, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And what is the problem is this: Bitcoin has become too popular. Yes. So, Nick had the number 185,000 transactions. So on average, I think it's around that 200,000 transactions a day. And that obviously is a great success. But the problem is that Bitcoins are stored in blocks, in a blockchain that is produced every 10 minutes. And that block has a maximum capacity of 1 megabyte. So Bitcoin becoming too popular, these blocks are effectively becoming full. And that's what you see in the image behind me, where you see the 1 megabyte limit. And this is an average. So it's already reaching this limit. And it's basically putting a damp on some of the growth, or at least to the extent that people have to pay mining fees in order to be prioritized on the blockchain. So diving a little bit deeper and comparing it to the transaction volume in the market today, Visa does about 2,000 transactions per second. A company like PayPal does 115 transactions per second. And Bitcoin, right now, with this limitation, can do about 7 transactions per second. Right. So there you very visually can see what the what the capacity problem is of Bitcoin to get it on a global scale as a de facto currency, as a de facto payment platform. So what to do? So the hard part about Bitcoin is that it is an open source protocol, and there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people in the community that basically need to reach consensus in order to adopt changes to it. And I'd like to show you quickly who those stakeholders are and how, what influence they have and how they are affected. So if we look at the stakeholders on the core level, it's the developers of the Bitcoin protocol. So these are the people who are, in terms of influence, are developing solutions to problems that the Bitcoin protocol faces. And they are affected by potentially writing redundant code. If there is a split off, as they call it, a hard fork in the protocol where the community starts following a different fork of the software version, then any development that they will be doing on the other side would be redundant. And they can, in that sense, lose the commit access to be able to commit code commits to this protocol. And with that, maybe lose some recognition from the community, because some of them have some egos, of course, as well. So on the level above that, really, but I couldn't figure out how to reverse that thing on the table in the presentation. You have the miners who validate these blocks. That was the computational power that I showed you. And they need to pick the mining protocol that they're mining the blocks off. And what they might be facing is if they choose the wrong one, then their economies might not play out as they intended to be. So, for instance, to give you an example of that, the majority of the miners are in China, and they have something called the Great Internet Wall of China. And if the block sizes are too big, that might affect the other parts of the community that are outside of China and vice versa. And in that sense, the economic incentives might be negative for the rest of the community, whereas the majority is in China. Just to explain that better, they will be able to broadcast their blocks first, and that gives them a strategic advantage, so they could, in the end of the day, have more rewards in terms of newly mined Bitcoins. Then, once the blocks are solved, they are communicated to the nodes who need to reach consensus that they have been following the right consensus rules. And there is at least a community discussion that additional costs may be incurred if you run a node to do that, if the block size increases. And then the wallet infrastructure providers, like our company, we have a brokerage in Sweden, we would need to implement these protocol changes. And that, of course, can lead to disruption of service if there's something wrong with the protocol. And then finally, the end user that can switch not only to a different servers within Bitcoin, but they can go to one of these other cryptocurrencies altogether. And they are affected potentially by the cost. As I stated, the mining fee that they have to pay can go up. So they might be inclined to basically go to another cryptocurrency where the cost is much lower. But it also could affect the speed, and ultimately, and it has been a case with the malleability issue in the protocol, where there was loss of actual money. Most famously, Mt. Gox was stating that they were affected by that protocol issue. That was the company in Japan that ultimately went bankrupt and lost $500 million in the process. Turns out it wasn't the case, but you know. So to visualize how this battle of the protocol and the scalability is going with different solutions, there are now different proposals how to scale it most effectively. From just raising the block size indefinitely, which is one of the earliest proposals, to, okay, we're going to do a small block size increase now, and then later on we're going to increase it a little bit more. The most famous ones right now are Bitcoin Core, which is the original protocol, and Bitcoin Classic. And in the graph behind me, you can see the overall graph on top. That is the aggregate of all the nodes. And then the second one is Bitcoin Core, the original Bitcoin protocol, which has been going a little bit in decline over time. And then the blue line represents the first proposal that was put out by a Bitcoin developer called Mike Hearn, that ultimately left Bitcoin altogether due to this drama and this deadlock in this block size debate, and he joined a blockchain company. But now we are in the phase where I think it's purple, I'm colorblind, but I think it's purple. Bitcoin Classic has been growing, and has been growing in adoption. So this is now the new proposal, which is very close to what actually the core developers want to do as well. So the interesting thing about all of these stakeholders that need to come together in a consensus is that over time, and it started sort of last year with this debate, that you can start seeing that this whole community slowly comes together and gets to a solution. However, this is unfortunately still much behind. So it starts with the miners. If you look at the different stakeholders, and only 5.6% of those are now solving classic blocks. So in terms of disruption with the core protocol, it seems like we're going to be following the core developers, which is not necessarily bad. They have created very intelligent solutions to some of the problems out there. However, if the community doesn't like it, we might be going back to other cryptocurrencies, like what was happening in March, where the currency Ethereum reached 1 billion market cap. And it's not to say that might not happen again. They have some technical advances. They started as a smart contract platform, but have evolved in many ways and have been growing adoption, but they can be used as a cryptocurrency as well. So with that, are there any questions? I guess I can do one or two questions. This is going to be continued, is the main message of this. No one? Question? No? One question, yeah.
Thanks for the presentation first. Svetosov Stefan of 3TS Capital. It's probably not directly linked to scalability, but just a general question about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular, about anti-money laundering regulations and how virtually, the whole protection mechanism which has been put on the banking system reflects in the cryptocurrencies world.
You're talking about the protection system of funds being protected by the government, or you're talking about the protectionism of creating a moat around your financial institution?
Tracing back the ultimate owners and the ultimate source and destination of transfers.
So in terms of regulation, Bitcoin in particular has some characteristics that are hard to work with the existing regulation. Now, the question, of course, is if we're looking at an open source protocol that is being adopted around the world without any friction, essentially, whether we're dealing with the internet, the analogies of the internet, where regulation will have to catch up of what the people want and what the people are adopting, Or if we're dealing with something more analogous to the music industry, where ultimately the first companies like Napster didn't make it, and then Spotify had to close license deal and follow the existing copyright system that was in place. It's quite early to tell. On a whole, Bitcoin is legal in pretty much all of the Western world. There's increasingly regulations coming into place to support Bitcoin. Predominantly, there's been a recent announcement where Barclays, one of the tier 1 banks in the world, accepted a Bitcoin company as a customer to their bank. That was an announcement in the UK. So on the whole, it seems like there's going to be broader adoption, not only for Bitcoin, for cryptocurrency as a whole. The blockchain narrative is easier from the financial institution because you don't have to, deal with those questions. So it's about making the bank more efficient and dealing with the pipelines of what you built your institution on, and you can deal better with privacy of those transactions and doing partial sharing of the transactions. And I'm done. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.